I apologize, I was cut off at the end of the last recording. To finish up what I was saying before, there is a list of specific rating scales that you might use for box 9 down here. I've tried to include the most commonly used rating scales in the district, as well as ones that you might see on outside evaluations, just to cover all the bases. Just as in previous boxes, make sure you're including name, credentials, scales, names, meanings, etc. To pop back up to box 8, this is perhaps the most self-explanatory box. Do students' attendance patterns demonstrate adverse effect? This is, generally speaking, a pretty simple yes or no. You will include how many days of school the student missed, generally during the current school year, although if you're doing this at the beginning of a school year, you might include data from the prior school year as well. A little bit trickier right now at the time of this recording due to COVID and whatnot, but do your best to capture attendance records here. And then lastly, we have box 10, which is kind of a catch-all for any other information not captured in the first 9 boxes that might also help to verify adverse effect. This might include things like speech-language testing, augmentative communication evaluations. Generally, those are for students if it's not already captured on a speech-language form. If they're not qualifying under speech-language, but it still has some relationship to the student's disability, such as a student with autism who is nonverbal or has some challenges related to speech and language, but is only identified under the autism category, you might put that information here in box 10. You might include cognitive testing scores if the student is not already identified under SLD. The reason for that being that those scores would be captured on the SLD form if they were identified under that category. But if something else were going on, such as, well, just to sort of keep going back to the autism category, if you have a student who has some pretty disparate cognitive scores under the autism category and you want to capture that, this would be a place that you could do that. You might also put things like personality assessments or projective tests here. Those aren't things that typically the current school psychologists here in RSU 10 use, but they might show up on outside evaluations. Or sometimes Dr. Collins, who's done some evaluations for us in the past, has also used some of that projective stuff. He likes the draw a person test, for example. Or any other kind of psych testing that hasn't been captured in one of these boxes or on another eligibility form. If we happen to have an assistive technology assessment, FBA, a functional behavior assessment, might also go here if you have some information to share there. So again, just sort of a catch-all for anything that doesn't fit in 1 through 9, but is relevant and does help to make your case for adverse effect would be important to include. After you've finished all 10 boxes where you're filling in your data, you come down here and you have to answer a few questions. Did you only consider one assessment source? That's almost always going to be a no, because you're pulling stuff from all over the place for this form. You know, if you've got NUIA scores and a psych eval and attendance data and some classroom observation data, that's 4 different sources right there. So generally speaking, it's going to be a no. If for some reason it were ever a yes, you'd have to check yes and provide some rationale. So that might be something like, you know, maybe the student is brand new to the district and so we don't have a lot of information. We can't pull attendance data because we don't have that. We don't have old standardized test scores. All we have is this brand new psych eval. That might be a case where we only have one data source, but even then it generally would have multiple assessments within. So it would be exceedingly rare that you would say yes here. The next question is, has the IEP team determined that there's an adverse effect? And sorry, I'm distracted by a text message. I don't know what that means. You would, in that case, in this district, if you've made it this far on the form, if you've filled out the form, the answer is going to be yes. Is there an adverse effect? Yes. Because if there weren't an adverse effect, you wouldn't be filling out this form. But you might someday work in another district where the director might require that you fill out the adverse effect even if you're saying no. You just don't work in that district right now. So for now, if you've made it this far, you're going to say yes. And again, this next question is going to be pretty self-explanatory as well. You're going to indicate that it's of such a degree that the student requires special education, because if it were not, you would not fill out the form. But again, if you work in another district someday, you may still need to fill out the form, in which case you would check this bottom box if the team were proceeding with a 504 or general education instruction. The last piece is to write a quick summary of the determination. We have in the past been kind of dinged by the department for making our statements in this box a little too cookie cutter, just simply saying something like, the team determined there was sufficient adverse effect or something like that. So we've worked to make this more individualized for each student. We've still tried to use a formula to make it as easy for you as possible, but you're filling in specific individualized information within that form. So you're saying the student's diagnoses of, and then indicate what they are, which manifest as, so this is just a fancy way of saying what does it look like. So if this student has autism and ADHD, that doesn't look the same in every student. For this student, it's impulsivity, noncompliance, and difficulty communicating with people with whom he is not familiar, interfere with his ability to be successful at school. The next part of this is, what are we going to do about it? What are the services? And sometimes in the case of intense accommodations, we might also include accommodations here. Or if the only service we're providing is consult, we might also want to kind of beef that up, include accommodations here. As such, he requires specially designed instruction. That's of course what we're going to say most of the time. But again, for a student on consult, we might say something like, as such, Josh requires consultation services along with classroom accommodations of preferential seating, extended time for tests, a written behavior plan, etc., in order to benefit from his educational program. Once you've done that, you're all set. The adverse effect form does not require signatures, so you don't have to worry about getting signatures. You do, however, need to worry about getting the finished copy into the hands of the office staff, so alerting them that the adverse effect form is ready, because it does need to be mailed home to the parent, as well as put into the student's cumulative file. But it does not require signatures. So once you've finished that summary box, you're good to start letting people know that it's done. Submit it to your BBC for approval, or whatever your process happens to look like. As always, if you have any questions about that, you of course can approach your BBC or any member of the site team.